barn burner, a lightning bolt of a sermon. I brought in illustrations from the medieval scholastic theologians. I used illustrations from contemporary society. This was a sermon for the ages. And in 14 minutes, I crammed in several years of seminary education. I knew they'd never heard anything like this at that church. And so when the service was over, I proudly took my place by the door with the rector to greet the congregation as they left, ready for the acclamations, the affirmation, the acclaim and applause. The very first man through is a guy named Jim Flagler. And he said, he gave me a big hug, and he patted me on the back, and he shook my hand vigorously. He said, "Oh, Jason, we sure do miss you in the choir." My balloon got deflated very quickly, I can tell you. You can't go home again. We all know that, don't we? In one way or another. You can't go home again. You can't go back to the place where people saw you grow up, where they know your flaws, where they saw you playing soccer or taught you in church school or whatever the case might be. You can't go home again. And Jesus learns that lesson in today's gospel. We know this story. You remember that last week, Jesus goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, and there, for the one and only time in his ministry, is asked to speak and to preach. And when he's up front, he takes the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and he opens it up to the place in Isaiah where the prophet proclaims on God's behalf that one is coming who will proclaim liberty to the captives, restoration of health to those who are broken, the year of the Lord's favor and mercy to all God's people. And Jesus rolls the scroll back together and then says, "Today in your hearing, this scripture has been fulfilled." And that's where we pick up the story today. Jesus says, the scripture has been fulfilled. The one in front of you, the one you saw playing ball in the village square, the one you saw apprenticing in his father's workshop, the one you perhaps taught, he is the fulfillment of God's promise. Today, the scripture has been fulfilled. And if the story had stopped there, everything would be great, because the crowd is so proud of Jesus. This hometown boy who has gone off, he's gone to Capernaum and some other places, he's performed wonders and miracles, a word of which has come back to Nazareth. They have enjoyed what he has had to say, and everything is good. But of course the story doesn't end there, does it? Because Jesus almost picks a fight with the people of his home congregation. He says to them, seeing their positive response to what he has had to say so far, he quotes to them the proverb that physician, heal yourself, and that a prophet is without honor in his own hometown. And then he goes on to tell different illustrations from the Hebrew scriptures about moments when God's grace and compassion were offered to people outside the covenant community. To the widow at Zarephath, who was not a Jew, and to Naaman the Syrian, the only leper healed, even though there were many other lepers in Israel at the time. And suddenly, the tone changes, and the crowd gets ugly. And ultimately, as we hear, they take Jesus out and they want to throw him off a cliff, and he walks through their midst unharmed to continue his ministry. It's a rather shocking change. I mean, before they even get to coffee hour, the people have turned on Jesus, which I hope never happens at Holy Comforter. But I don't think the real issue is that you can't go home again, because Jesus' initial words were well received. I think what ultimately is the truth of this gospel is that Jesus is pointing out to his hometown friends and neighbors and family members that their understanding of God is too small, that their God is too small. Because it is when Jesus says that God's love is for the people even outside the covenant community that they begin to turn on him and begin to reject what he has said. And at that point, that's when things get ugly. But Jesus, when he quotes the prophet Isaiah, when he reads from the scroll, he doesn't say that Isaiah has pronounced on God's behalf, "I have come to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor to Jews. I have come to set free those within the covenant community who are enslaved. I have come to restore sight to those who are blind only within our own community and neighborhood. Instead, the implication is that Jesus has come to proclaim liberty to all people, that he has come to restore wholeness to all people, that he has come to redeem and release and renew all people, not just the folks who look like us or think like us or have the same background. And that was too much. That was too much for the people of Nazareth. Their God, their understanding of God was too small. And surely that's a temptation into which we fall as well, isn't it? That we imagine that there are only certain ways and fashions in which God's grace and mercy can be manifested, can be known. That we set limits and boundaries upon the ways in which God can operate and be present in our lives and in our world. And I think that's where we have to turn to our epistle today. The familiar, the beautiful, the profound words from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Because if Jesus talks about the what, restoration, redemption, liberation, Paul tells us the how, love. We know these words so well. We've read them, we've heard them at so many weddings and elsewhere, that we might become a little bit inured to the power and the depth and the richness of what Paul tells us. Because ultimately what he is saying is that love is without limit and boundary. That love transcends anything we know and can comprehend. That God's love is beyond anything that we might try to project onto God. And also, he tells us that love is a choice and a decision. It is the choice to act for the other rather than for the self. The decision to reach out in compassion and